You're in the process of coming out as trans, and maybe coming out at work is next up on your list. You might be wondering, how do I go about coming out at work? Should I maybe come out at my current job or try something else, like leaving my job and trying to come out in between jobs? Well, for me, that's something I wondered about over and over. It felt so terrifying to come out to all these people that I had worked with for over 2 years at this point. It would almost be easier to start someplace else. Like, it's a clean slate, it's a fresh beginning, and yeah, the grass is always greener on the other side. So before I get more into my experience and what I chose and why I chose it, let's break it down. What are the positives and negatives or pros and cons of each of these choices? Because you may likely be considering both, and I think there's some clear pros and cons to both. So let's talk about some of the pros of coming out at your current job. You already have the job, so you don't have to find a new one. At least, not yet. Fingers crossed. Hopefully nothing bad happens. So there's more financial stability in this option should things work out. You already know who you're working with, you're familiar with the work environment, with the job, with the requirements. You also potentially have some more control over the coming out process, because you can kind of do it in a more layered, staged, tiered approach. Do I want to talk to HR? Which you could discuss with HR privately and make some solid coming out plans, and even talk with them about what sorts of protections and policies they may already have in place. Which, if you're working at a big company, they're maybe more likely to have some protections in place or policies, or at least some LGB protections, if not for the T. If you're like me working at a small company, like, those sorts of conversations about trans people had never happened before me. There are also a lot of cons to coming out at your current job, and some of these cons are like related to coming out in any situation. A clear one is like, is your job actually supportive of trans people? Is there a way of even being able to find that out without outing yourself? What is the general climate on LGBT support? What does their anti-discrimination policy say? All of these things you should have already had access to, so you wouldn't necessarily have to ask HR for them and maybe raise suspicion. You've been working with these people for an extended period of time as whatever your dead name is, and then you switch suddenly, in their eyes, to working full-time as your full, true, authentic self. That could create some discomfort from everyone involved. They knew you before transition, so there's even increased opportunities for them to dead name or misgender you, because they have to go through that process of kind of switching things around in their own mind that somebody at a new job maybe wouldn't have to do. Depending on your transition, get ready for some loss of privilege. And this is something that is very salient for trans women specifically, who may have gotten accustomed, whether they wanted it or not, to being granted some more ease of access to things because the world saw you as a guy. Like being seen as a white, cisgender, heterosexual male before I came out, that definitely helped me in many ways. But coming out as a trans woman, coming out as a queer trans woman, there's a lot of things that could come up. You could be experiencing homophobia, transphobia, sexism, misogyny. You may have never experienced these things before, and you especially may not have experienced them in the workplace. But that is also something that could happen at any workplace. There's always the possibility that HR won't keep this private. You talk to them, make a plan, they may talk to your boss, they may talk to other people in the company, word may spread either accidentally or intentionally. You could come out to your coworkers one by one, that's a process I did, but there is always that risk that somebody you come out to could accidentally or intentionally tell someone else, just in the same case as with HR. And then, of course, lastly, you could lose this job if they're not supportive. You could be fired for coming out as trans. There are no federal protections based on gender identity. There are no federal protections based on sexual orientation. And, so you could be fired for being trans. And if you work in a right-to-work state, then you could be fired for any reason. They could fire you for being trans, but chalk it up to something else. They don't even have to give a reason in states like that, and Florida was one of those states where I came out. There's just a lot of uncertainty in the process. But now let's look at, what if you decide to come out between jobs? This might give you an opportunity, might give you a push to leave a workplace you didn't like, or search for a new job, find better opportunities. And you can do all this research on companies ahead of time to find a workplace that is specifically inclusive of trans people, that has specific protections for you. And then it wouldn't matter if you're out or not. I mean, yeah, you still might encounter discrimination at work, but you would be protected from being fired, at least, you know, without risk of a lawsuit. You know, you get to start a job where no one knew you before you transitioned. You know, so they didn't know your dead name. They didn't know your pronouns before. Yeah, there's always that risk. Maybe you're not fully passable, and there might be a risk of being misgendered there, but they don't have this experience of working with somebody who looked completely different, who went by a different name, who went by different pronouns. So there's not as much of that process of like having to get reacclimated to switching all of that. But there's a lot of cons here too. There is less financial stability here actually, because you would likely quit your job, transition in between jobs, and then start a new job, which might cause you to rush your transition, because how long can you go without a job? Do you have a lot of money saved away that you could go a good while without a job? Or do you have a partner or family or friends that could financially and emotionally support you during this time and are willing to do that? There's a much more time-sensitive window here, I think, because, you know, you won't be working. There's that financial insecurity. And I think for many of us, finances are a big issue. As trans people, it is harder to get jobs. Medically transitioning is expensive too. You know, if you're going through this process of transitioning, any money that you had saved away might already be allocated to transition-related stuff, and you might not have any savings. That was the case for me. Like, I hardly had any savings because transitioning, at least the way I wanted to, was really fucking expensive. And if you're applying for a new job, you'll likely need work references, and ones that may or may not know that you're trans. Your entire work history, when you're searching for this new job, is going to be under your dead name, so keep that into account. You will likely be outed in the interview process or the application process if you weren't already transparent about being trans ahead of time. Even if you were able to change all your legal documents before starting the new job, again, your work history would still be in your previous name, and that would be another very unlikely scenario to be able to change all those things in such a short period of time. There's this idea of navigating, do you want to try to be stealth, or do you want to be open about your identity? And stealth is just like, for all intents and purposes, you don't tell anyone you're trans. The world just knows you as, you know, if you're a trans woman, the world just knows you as a cisgender woman. And same for a trans man, just knows you as a cisgender man. And there's added pressure either way there, because there could be a worry of like, okay, I want to go stealth, but there could be this worry of like, in many interactions, do people know? Are they going to find out? How are they going to react? But in this case, people in the hiring process are probably going to already know you're trans, so even if you try to be stealth, there are probably still going to be people at your company that know you're trans, and then there again could be that risk of being outed on a bigger scale if that does not remain secret. On top of all of this, you have to go through the process of acclimating to a new work environment, as if transitioning in and of itself wasn't hard enough. There's probably so much more I could name here, and there's definitely an overlap, like you see, of pros and cons between these different options. But for me personally, the cons of coming out between jobs felt way too great. And there's just so much uncertainty, there's financial instability, there's wondering what to tell my new employer, how to tell them, when to tell them, having to come out to people that don't know me at all, and I have no idea if they're going to be supportive. There's that fear of being outed in the hiring process. Coming out between jobs would have only been something that I would have done if that was my last resort. Like if I came out at my current job and got fired, and then I had to find a new job. In all likelihood, I might have just delayed my transition. That might have happened if I lost my job. And going stealth, that was never an option for me. Like, I don't feel that I'm passable all the time currently, and I definitely was not back in 2015. Being open about my identity is also something that's very important to me personally and my activism. I didn't want to come out of one closet just to go back into another. And that's what being stealth feels like to me. That might not be what it feels like to you, but that's what it's like to me, because it's just, I'm coming out as trans, but then I'm going back in the closet and pretending again that I'm cis, just a different gender. And that would be too much pressure for me, because I'd be constantly wondering, are people going to find out? And it's just not worth it. But I also realized I had a lot of privilege with the fact of being able to come out, being able to keep my job, being able to be fully out, get back into grad school, and being able to pursue a career that really fulfills me. All that being said, consider your unique situation when you're trying to make this decision. Take into account everything I've said here, but put it into context of what your particular situation looks like. If you have things like financial stability and partners or family that can financially and emotionally support you, at least in the short term, coming out between jobs may seem more feasible for you. And it also depends on what you do for your work too. Like if you're self-employed or you work online or whatever, there are certain situations that may make it easier or more difficult. So just take all that into account. Like personally, I preferred ripping off the Band-Aid rather than prolonging the inevitable, because I felt like coming out between jobs would just prolong the inevitable, and even delay my transition, like I said. But of course, that is easier for me to say in retrospect. Really just take the time to consider what's best and also feasible for your particular situation. So I know that was a lot, but let me know what you think down in the comments below. Any other additional pros and cons you would add, or is there even an entirely different path that I didn't consider? And as always, thank you so much for watching. Tipsy and I love you all so very much, and we hope you're staying safe, happy, and healthy as much as you can during this tough time. Remember, if you have not done so already, please give this a thumbs up, please share, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Bye for now.